Okay, so let's begin. IELTS writing. Okay, so as I mentioned before, for the writing section, there are two writing tasks, academic task 1 and academic task 2. And as I said before, academic task 1, let me get my trusty pointer out. Okay, academic task 1 presents test candidate. Okay, can you see clearly? Why don't I move this here and let me shrink it a bit so it'll be easier for you to see. Okay, now I'm not blocking you, right? Okay, academic task 1 presents test candidates with a graph, table, chart, or diagram. The candidate is asked to describe, summarize, or explain the information presented in their own words. Academic task 2 as test candidate to write an essay in response to a point of view, argument, or problem. So academic task 1 asks you to summarize a graph, and academic task 2 asks you to respond to a prompt. Okay. Of course, the topics used in the IELTS general training writing test are of general interest. So it's a bit easier. Perhaps you have to respond to a letter. From what I know, you don't have to respond to a graph. Okay, so the purpose, assess ability to analyze, organize, and summarize information, assesses lexical resource, word choice. What is all this stuff? Okay, so you can read this on your own, but let's just get straight to the writing section and let me demonstrate and explain how you handle a writing task. So let's talk about some problems first. Okay, don't know how to begin task 1, can't think of any ideas for task 2, tons of grammar errors, essays, often go off topic, can never find the right words to use. So these are some of the problems that students mentioned in my IELTS group. But let's talk about some solutions and let's just look at the graphs. So these are the types of graphs that you may encounter in task 1. Okay. 所以你会碰到这一些的图表。So as you can see here, you have a line graph. What is this called? 这个叫什么？这是 bar chart 还是 column graph？ 而且区别在哪里啊 ？Bar chart, okay, a bar is usually horizontal and a column is usually vertical. So write that down for me. So a bar chart is usually horizontal and a column graph is usually vertical. Okay, so please write that down. And then you have tables. You have, what is this? You have a pie chart with a table. And then you even have a flow chart. And then you even have maps. So there are 6 types of task 1 graphs that you may encounter. Are there more? I think there is a type 7 because sometimes they mix different graphs together. So you may get a combination graphs. There are certain words and phrases that are more suitable for certain types of graphs, but we'll go over that later. For example, let me give you a quick example to illustrate my point. For here, perhaps you will say increase, decrease, but here maybe you will say consists of, or account for, or make up 30%, something like this. Okay, so there are certain phrases more suitable for certain types of graphs. So yes, you do need to understand the certain different types of graphs and the language that you use to describe different graphs, but they assess you on the same abilities. 所以它的确是有不一样的术语，符合各式各样的这种图表，但是它评估的能力是一样的。So what exactly are they assessing you? Of course, we can look back on the official definition, assess grammatical range, assess coherence and cohesion. But what exactly are they asking you to do? 他们请你做什么？ They're asking you to summarize the information. So they're actually asking you to interpret data. And you have to turn this data into meaningful language inside your mind. And then through output, through writing, you have to illustrate that information in words, phrases, in sentences, and even a complete essay to your readers. And your readers have to be able to decipher the information that you provide to them. And they should see an illustration of the graph that you are trying to describe. So essentially, they're assessing your ability to basically decode information and to use language to transfer that information into meaningful words, phrases, sentences, and a complete essay to the readers. So when the readers read your essay, they should see a picture inside their mind of what the graph roughly looks like. Okay, it doesn't have to be exactly the same. It's very difficult to do so, to just read a paragraph and be able to see a picture very clearly, but they have to have a rough idea of what the graph looks like inside their minds. Okay, so let me check your comments, and then we'll begin with task 1. Okay, so let's take a look at this task 1. Okay, I'm not really going to go into theory today because most of you already know what the IELTS writing test consists of, but perhaps you don't really know the procedure for handling this type of task. And to be honest, this is very difficult for me because I received my education in the US, and yes, I did learn how to summarize graphs, but it's not something that we do on a regular basis. So when I was taking the IELTS for the very first time, this part was extremely difficult for me because it's something that I'm not accustomed to doing. Usually you don't really summarize graphs until you are in graduate school, when you have to interpret data. Okay, of course you have to do this in university as an undergraduate, but it's not something that you do regularly unless perhaps you are a science major. So this was quite difficult for me to grasp. So I can definitely understand the problems you are facing. But let's take this as an example. 所以我们以这个当例子好了。What do we do when we see this graph? So the first thing that I would do, of course, is to read the prompt. Okay? The graph below gives information from a 2008 report about consumption of energy in the United States of America since 1980 with projections until 2030. So I know part of the graph is going to be written in past tense, and perhaps part of the graph is going to be using a future tense, or at least you have to use phrases like is expected to, is anticipated to. Please write these phrases down. Is expected to, is anticipated to, well, is going to, is forecast to. So you can use these types of phrases to talk about future trends, future expectations. 帮我写一下我刚才说的那几个片语好不好？ Okay, 当时被动语态 passive, of course, right? Is expected to or are expected to. Be expected to, are expected to. Okay? And let's see. So first, I will read the prompt, kind of understand what it is talking about, but it's very difficult to understand the entire graph just from the prompt alone. So the next thing that I would do is, of course, I will look at the graph very carefully. So I look on the y-axis and I see quadrillion units. Quadrillion, I just know that that's a lot. Okay, and then I see history and projections for the future, right? Where are we right now? 2017, of course, but they're not expecting you to write the trend for every single year. Of course, you have to look at the general trend. So I try to make sense. I try to connect the prompt with the graph. I don't just say petrol and oil is at 35 quadrillion units because that makes no sense whatsoever. That does not provide meaning. Most of the test candidates, I think they may have difficulty providing meaning, meaningful context, meaningful words, meaningful phrases. They just describe the trend. And this is going to hurt you a lot because telling me that petrol and oil is at 35 quadrillion units and then describing every single point is not going to help the readers picture or illustrate this image inside their mind, because if I give you just a ton of number, you're not going to be able to interpret that number. It's your job to interpret that number for them. So if you're just representing the information on this graph and you are just giving me fine details rather than meaning, then that may hurt you on the test. Okay, so what do you have to do? You have to make sense. What does this exactly mean? It means that Americans, or the United States of America, consumes roughly around 35 quadrillion units of petrol and oil in 1980. So I would actually mark certain points, and I would write maybe the subject, the verb, and the object. I would turn this point into a meaningful phrase. I won't just describe the trend. So that's the first thing that I will do. Why do I do this? Well, it helps me understand what this point means. 所以你第一个要做的步骤当然是看它的题目，第二个当然是分析图表，到底跟这个题目是有什么关系。但是第三个你要做的就是你要赋予这些点意义。所以你不可以只说petrol oil 占了是在35 quadrillion units， 而是这个数字到底是代表什么？所以你可以去写个片语。So I know U.S. consumes a lot of petrol and oil. I also know U.S. consumes a lot of coal and natural gas. And usually when the lines are similar, I would include them in perhaps one or two sentences or in the same paragraph. Because if I organize my information this way, it's easier for readers to reinterpret and to imagine. So coal and natural gas, I will group together. And nuclear, solar, wind, and hydropower, because they are so similar, of course, I will also group them together. So you can actually write 1, 2, 3, because this is probably the order in which you are going to present your information. You don't have to do this, but this may help you organize your thoughts. 所以你可以把一些数字写在旁边，1、2、3，那我就大概知道这是我要提到的第一个重点，这是我第二个要提到的重点，这是我第三个要提到的重点。你不一定要这样子做，但是它绝对会辅助你去理解这个图表，同时你在写作的时候，你比较不会忘掉你到底要写什么。Okay, so let's check some of your comments, and then we'll move on with this task. We'll actually read a sample from a high achiever. It's not provided by me. It's provided by Cambridge from one of these books. Okay, so I put the references at the end. You can go purchase this book if you want. Okay, so let's see your comments, and then we'll move on with the next part. So, what is the procedure for handling this type of task? At least my procedure. I'm not saying you have to use my way, but you can definitely take it as suggestions. Okay, so what is the first step that I use? Read the prompt, write that down. The second step is to look through the graph and try to find meaning. That's the second step. In the third step, I would try to organize the information. I can even put some numbers so I know exactly what I'm going to write in the order in which I will write or present this information. And the fourth step, I will begin writing. But I won't begin writing until I know exactly what I'm going to write. Because it's very difficult to write and look at the graph and think at the very same time. Because you have to worry about the words you have to use, you have to worry about grammar, you have to worry about coherence, you have to worry about development. So it's very difficult to worry about these 4 things at the same time. So I like to divide these processes up. Okay, let's see if you have written these tips down, and then we can move on. Please take a look. The graph shows energy. Let's look at the comment first. The model has been prepared by an examiner as an example of a very good answer. Of course, we're not gonna, the examiner is not gonna give you a score, but this is a very good answer. However, please note that this is just one example out of many possible approaches. So no, you don't have to write in this way to get a perfect score, but it's one of the ways that you can use to handle this task. The graph shows energy consumption in the US from 1980 to 2012 and projected consumption to 2030. So this is a restatement of the prompt. So in the very first part, you can just tell me what the prompt says in your own words. Okay? There's no need to use a very long template because the template will not fit every single task and it actually provides no meaning whatsoever. Okay? So just be straightforward and just paraphrase the prompt. Tell me what the prompt states in your own words. Okay. How about the second part? Usually you can present an overview. I think this candidate presents the overview here overall. Okay, so that's fine. Okay. How about the second paragraph? Let's read his essay or her essay. Petrol and oil, just like the way we organize the information, right? Petrol and oil are the dominant fuel sources throughout this period, with 35 quadrillion units used in 1980, okay, rising to 42 quadrillion in 2012. Despite some initial fluctuation, from 1995 there was a steady increase. Excellent. This is expected to, right here, to continue reaching 47 quadrillion in 2030. So excellent. Good. So we see he summarized the graph perfectly. He tells me that there is some fluctuation here, but it will continue to increase. Is it providing meaning? Yeah, dominant fuel sources. So I know what exactly petrol and oil are. I don't just say petrol and oil are at or were at 35 quadrillion units. I tell the reader exactly what they are, dominant fuel sources. And when I see the word dominant, I know that they account for most of the energy consumption. Okay? So it's providing meaning with dominant fuel sources. And summarizes trend very fluently. He or she uses participle clauses right here that was used in 1980, reduced clauses, rising to which rose. You don't have to use participle clauses, 就是分词构句, but a high achiever may be able to do so without many errors. 所以假如你不太会用的话，我建议你不要用。你猜为什么？因为你会写错很多地方，导致整个文章不清楚。那老师，你应该鼓励我用啊。你要记得，学习跟考试是不一样的东西。你考试的话是测验你的英文能力，跟学习的目的是不太一样的。所以考试你应该已经准备好再去考试，不是一边考一边学习。Okay, 好。Despite some initial fluctuations from 1995, there was a set. So tense is correct. This is expected to nearly perfect, right? Okay, let's look at the second part. So now I expect the test candidate to talk about coal and natural gas, right? But let's see. And I'm just taking the position of a typical reader, okay? Consumption of energy derived from natural gas and coal is, consumption of energy. So that's meaning right there. 他跟我说它是这个能力的消费，耗用这些能力。 所以它有意义，它不是只跟我说它在几点而已。For natural gas and coal is similar over the period. So similar over the period. So right away, I know that the trend is about the same. This is a good topic sentence. 主题句，因为我一看到这个主题句，我就知道等一下说的趋势一定是大概是一样的。So this provides a good overview of what this paragraph, the information that this paragraph is going to present. Okay? From 20 quadrillion and 15 quadrillion respectively in 1980, gas showed initial fall and coal a gradual increase. So I can see gas falling and coal increasing. But I know the difference is not too significant because of the initial topic sentence, similar over time. So in my mind, imagine that they're intertwined. Okay? Consumption has fluctuated, so I know it moves up and down since 1990, but both now provide 24 quadrillion units. Coal is predicted to, ooh, that's a nice one right here. Please write that phrase down. Is predicted to, is anticipated to, is expected to, is forecast to increase steadily to 31 quadrillion, whereas there's even a subordinate clause here. Excellent. Gas will remain stable at 25 quadrillion units. Perfect. So I'm expecting the writer to talk about nuclear, solar, wind, and hydropower next. And let's look at the sample. In 1980, energy from nuclear, hydro, and solar wind power was equal at only 4 quadrillion. So I know the starting point is the same for these. Perfect. Nuclear has risen by 3 quadrillion and solar wind by 2. So not much meaning is given here, but it's acceptable because it follows the trend given in the first and, well, the second and the third paragraphs. So it's consistent with the way that the writer is describing or presenting the information in previous paragraphs. And he does talk about energy from, so that's meaning right there. After slight increases, hydropower has fallen back to the 1980 figure. Very good, so I know it falls back to its original figure. It is expected to maintain this level, so I know it's probably going to stay relatively stable until 2030, while the others should rise slightly after 2025. So I know there's not much of a difference. Overall, and he even provides an overview, the U.S. will continue to rely on fossil fuel. Sounds like the U.S. we know today. Okay, with sustainable and nuclear energy sources remaining relatively insignificant. So this candidate, or this high achiever, does an excellent job at summarizing the information presented in the graphs. I'm not sure if he or she first organized information and then started to write, but as you can see, he chose his words very carefully. His syntax, there's variety in his syntactic structures. There is connection between his ideas, and the essay is fully developed. Okay? It summarizes the graph beautifully and very accurately. So this would be the sample of a high achiever. Any questions right now? 有没有任何的问题，请帮我留言一下，好不好？我看一下你的问题，然后我们再到 Task 2. Okay, so let's move straight to Task 2. And in Task 2, you are given a prompt. And some people say there are 3 types of prompts. I'm sure you'll find this in all sorts of websites. For example, there are agree and disagree or opinion questions, there are discussion questions, and there are problem solution questions or 2-part questions. You can divide these tasks in any way you see fit, but essentially they're all testing the same thing, your ability to respond to a question. So let's look at this prompt really quickly, and then I can give you some tips. You should spend 40 minutes on this task. By the way, I didn't mention this earlier. You only have 20 minutes for task 1. So I have to admit it's quite difficult. Okay. But for task 2, you have 40 minutes, and you don't really have to spend 20 minutes on task 1. You have an hour for the writing section, so you can use your time however you see fit. So perhaps you may take longer to finish task 1, so you can spend maybe 30 minutes if you want. For me, I usually finish task 1 first before moving on to task 2 because I find it more difficult and it requires more concentration for me. So by the time I finish task 1, I'm pretty much exhausted. But task 2 is usually pretty easy for me to handle because it's just a prompt asking my opinion. However, many students prefer to write task 2 first. I think that's fine, but I think task 1 requires a lot of focus. So I prefer to do it first. Okay, so let's look at task 2. You should spend about 40 minutes on this task, write about the following topics. Some people say that the best way to improve public health is by increasing the number of sports facilities. Others, however, say that this would have little effect on public health and that other measures are required. So first you have to check whether the information provided is just background information or are these statements actually opinions. So I see some people say, I know this is an opinion right away, and I know other, however, say that this, so I know this is also an opinion. So now I know there are 2 points of view. Some people say that the best way, and I will definitely circle this because it makes it very easy to argue against this prompt when there are words such as best or always. For example, honesty is always the best policy in all sorts of situation in any type of relationship. Okay? So it makes the prompt or the question very debatable. So if you agree with these people, you think the best way to improve public health is increasing the number of sports facilities. There are so many views that you can write about that disagree with this view. For example, you can say education is the best way to improve public health, right? Okay. Others, however, say that this would have little effect. So they're not really asking you to list every single other view. They're first asking you to say that this has little effect and that other measures are required. So you can mention other measures, but you also have to say whether this has little effect or not. Okay. I personally think that this will not have much of an effect because, well, I think there are better ways, and just improving sports facility like gyms and perhaps even parks will not really encourage people to exercise. We can see this clearly from Taiwan. There are parks and sports facilities everywhere, but people seldom have the time to do exercise. And this will not really improve public health because there could be a variety of factors contributing to public health. Okay? Education, public sanitation, personal hygiene, even the time of the year, because perhaps there are epidemics or certain disease that spread around certain seasons. And so there are a variety of factors to consider. 所以碰到这种题目的时候呢，基本上就是一定要两边都回应啊。为什么呢？因为他已经叫你两边都回应啊。So many people say, can I just argue one point and ignore the other point? Do you think this is really possible when the prompt asks you to discuss both these views and give your own opinion? It's clearly asking you to discuss both these views and not just one of these views. Most research done by linguists find that writers who address all parts of the prompt are usually high achievers. Writers who just choose a certain point to address or just write whatever he or she wants are typically low achievers. Okay. I don't mean to criticize, but it is an English assessment. So it's definitely assessing your ability to write. Okay, it's not saying anything about you, but it's just testing your ability to write in English. Okay, so give reasons for your answers. Of course, you have to support your answer and give relevant example. And of course, you see a sample here. And we're not going to go over every part of this essay. I'm not going to read the entire essay to you. You can do this at home. But let's see the structure. A problem of modern society is the declining level of health in the general population with conflicting views on how to tackle this worrying trend. So this is basically background information, providing me with a topic right away so I know exactly what I'm reading. So please don't just write a long template here. 很多人喜欢写一个很长的模板。The template has nothing to do with the essay, so get to the point right away. One possible solution is to provide more sports facilities to encourage a more active lifestyle. And many people think the thesis statement, 就是你的论点, always comes at the last sentence of the introduction. You can clearly see in this example that this is not so. This is not the thesis statement. So yes, for most argumentative essay or persuasive essays, the thesis statement appears in the last sentence of the introductory paragraph, but this is not true for all types of essay. So this paragraph argues one view, advocates, so this is a good way to begin arguing one point of view. Advocates of this view, the view above, believe that today's sedentary lifestyle and stressful working conditions mean that physical activity is no longer part of either our work or leisure time. If there were easy to reach local sports centers, we would be more likely to exercise. So this paragraph is essentially arguing that they should build or have these sports facilities because it's probably the best way to improve public health. Well, let's look at the next paragraph. I expect this person to argue the other point. 我期待他去讨论另外一点. However, yeah, I know there's a transition. Perfect. Okay, so you don't need a very long transition. You don't need to give me, while some people may agree with this, there are a variety of other people who may disagree with this view because they have different background and experiences. That's not telling me anything. Okay, so just get to the point right away. Be straightforward. However, there may be better ways of tackling this problem. Interest in sports is not universal. Okay, so this is arguing the other point of view. Excellent. As well as physical activity, high tax penalties. So first, this is essentially a rebuttal or a refutation of the counter-argument here. Counter-argument means the view that is not your own. Okay, the view of opposing view. Okay, 所以是反对的论点. And this is a refutation of the counter. What's the difference between rebuttal and refutation? A rebuttal is basically when you use refute a counter argument verbally and without much proof. But a refutation usually includes facts and details to refute the other point of view. So I would consider this a direct refutation of the counter argument. 所以这边的话是推翻反论点. And then he presents additional information to support his point of view. 所以他这边的话再提供更多的资讯去证明支持自己的观点. And you might not be accustomed to this, but he presents his opinion here. In my opinion, focusing on sports facilities is too narrow an approach and would not have the desired results. People should be encouraged not only to be more physically active, but to adopt a healthier lifestyle in general. So yes, you can put this in the very beginning if you want, or it can come at the end. You just have to be very clear with your approach. And different writing instructors, have different opinions about where to put the thesis statement. But as you can see here, this model has been prepared by an examiner as an example of a very good answer. However, please note that this is just one example out of many possible approaches. So there is no one method for handling all types of tasks. Okay? You have to have a variety of approaches because that is the quality, the essential quality of a high-achieving candidate. Okay? And so usually when I approach a question, if you want to practice and develop your logical reasoning, okay, you can always take notes for different types of question. So rather than just argue one view, I would just argue both views. It's actually easier to argue both sides. Why? 为什么会比较容易就是讨论反论点呢？这样转来转去不是很麻烦吗？而且这样不会让你的写作变得模棱两可吗？ So you can just look at this. Even though many people from different countries care about environmental problems, the environmental situation can't be improved in the future. So I know this is an opinion, can't be improved. It's pretty much an opinion in many people from many different countries. I know this is an opinion. To what extent do you agree or disagree with this statement? So why don't I just say agree or disagree? Why do I have to argue both views? Well, can you find 2 or 3 good reasons why you completely agree? It's very difficult to do so. But when you divide your views into agree or disagree, it's very easy to find one reason to support each view. But it's very difficult to find 3 good reasons to support one view. Why? Because that usually requires a lot of thinking and research. But in a high-stress environment like the IELTS writing test, you don't really have the leisure to think for a very long time. You have to organize your ideas right away, and then you have to present your views. So I would actually try to find 1 or 2 good reasons for each view. In the way that I decide which one is my thesis and which one is my counter-argument is by taking down notes. Because the view that has more notes is the view that I support, usually. Okay? And many people would tell me that there's no time to take notes on the IELTS because the test center only provides you 40 minutes to write. Well, actually, you can take about 5 minutes to take notes in 30, perhaps, I don't know, 25, 30 minutes to write, and maybe 5 minutes to proofread and edit your work. This is usually the approach that I take. And even if you don't want to take notes on the test, when you are learning, you have to take notes because this will internalize the skill. So when you view different types of prompts, you can logically organize your ideas right away. 对，我叫你做笔记，不是你就是考试一定要做笔记，而是你需要把这种能力，就是把主语简化，然后分成不一样的边，去内建化。所以你真正在考试的时候，你就不需要花那么多的时间去思考了。Okay, so that's basically my presentation for today. Do you have any question about the IELTS writing section? If you have questions or comments, please leave them below right now. Now check them one more time and address your questions. 就看一下你的这个问题。Yeah, it's very difficult to find two good reasons. Let me give you an example. The government should invest more money on environmental protection rather than economic development. 政府应该投资更多经费在环保。给我2个理由。Give me 2 reasons why. The first reason is that it's good for the environment. That's not giving me a reason. It's good for the environment because it improves the quality of life. Excellent. That's one reason. Okay, give me another reason why the government should invest more money on environmental protection. The second reason is that it will make the world more beautiful and it will make me happier. Isn't that the first reason? So you see, it's very difficult to think of 2 reasons, 2 good reasons to support one view right away. But it's very easy to find one reason to support either view right away. And if you can, of course, you want to be able to think of multiple reasons. Okay. but theory is very different than practice. Okay, so any other questions? 内建化, internalize, very good. Okay, so that's it for our presentation for today. If you have any questions, please leave them below, and I will try to respond to them when I get a chance. Thank you very much. Good night.